Welcome to preparing for the SAT evidence-based reading and writing section. Today we are going to be focusing on inference questions and supporting evidence questions. Many questions on the SAT will test your ability to figure out what a selection suggests or implies. These implicit meaning questions will require you to draw reasonable inferences from the text. Remember that a reasonable inference is an educated guess. You will also encounter questions that require you to identify the textual evidence that best supports the inferences you've drawn. As you read a passage, pause after each paragraph and make an inference. Ask yourself, what reasonable conclusion can I draw from this information? Think about what the passage states and also what you know to be true based upon prior knowledge. In the margin, record your inferences, then underline the evidence that supports these inferences. This will enable you to more easily find the correct answer to inference questions. Some key takeaways here is when we're making an inference, we need to remember that in order for it to be an accurate educated guess, we really need to rely on the evidence that is presented in the passage. The SAT will ask you not only to accurately interpret ideas and information in text, but also to identify textual evidence that supports your conclusions. You will need to identify a specific line of text that supports what the text clearly states and what it implies. In considering whether a piece of evidence adequately supports the conclusion you have drawn, ask yourself, which sentence from the passage could I use to prove that my conclusion is correct? If someone questioned my conclusion about a passage, what phrase or sentence could I use to convince them? One format that regularly appears on the SAT is a two related questions. The first question will ask you to define a word, make an inference, identify a supporting detail, or test you over another skill. A second question will ask you to determine which part of the passage provides the best evidence for the answer to the first question. Or you may be asked to figure out which of the four answer choices is supported by the evidence from the passage. So below you can see two types of SAT questions that you might find, and they're kind of paired up. So the passage indicates that the assumption made by scientists in lines X may be, and you're choosing what it's indicating, and then you're going to find that correct evidence. One of the tips that I give my students is often if we're stuck on this first question, going ahead and looking at the evidence to try to answer this question might actually help us come up with a word that it's indicating, or might help us come up with an answer that best answers question one. So let's get started. Today I'm going to model two SAT passages, and since today's focus is on making inferences and supporting those inferences with evidence from the passage, that's going to be our focus for our annotations today. There is one creature perfectly adapted and temperamentally suited to some of the most inhospitable areas of the world, the camel. And already we can see that we have a topic that is outlined, but we also notice that this camel is a topic. We also notice that the camel is resilient. And that's an inference that I'm making based off the idea that it can survive and is suited for inhospitable areas, areas where people can't normally survive and thrive. In the ecology of the Sahara Desert, the nomad and the camel are mutually dependent on each other. The nomad provides the camel with water and food. The camel provides the nomad with milk, wool, transportation, and meat. Above all, the camel provides work and gives meaning to the lives of the tribes that crisscross the Sahara. The camel provides the only means by which human beings can constructively utilize the desert. So camel herding combined with nomadism to take advantage of seasonal rains and recurrent scattered vegetation is the only feasible solution to surviving in the desert. The camel is at the heart of all the efforts to live in harmony with the desert. Okay, and so we see one central idea that is present here, and our inference is the camel is irreplaceable to the desert people. We can see that here where it says the camel provides the only means by which human beings can constructively utilize the desert. The camel is the heart of all efforts to live in harmony. And so again, we notice just the irreplaceable nature of the camel. We're going to collect some explicit details from the passage. In order to make inferences, remember we need to rely on the actual evidence-based details that took place in the passage. So the camel is physically and temperamentally adapted to extreme areas such as the Sahara. The nomad and the camel are dependent on one another to survive. In the Sahara. The nomad provides water and food for the camel, while the camel provides milk, wool, transportation, and so these details were outlined in the passage. They are explicit. They come straight from the passage. So now we're going to think through some of the implied details based on those explicit ideas. So details that state that nomads and camels are, quote, mutually dependent on one another. And we can see that right here in the passage, that mutual dependence. And that camels give meaning to the lives of tribes, suggest camels and people have a relationship based on mutual affection. So we're able to infer this mutual affection because we can kind of see how they mutually depend on one another to thrive in their harsh environment. We also note that the people of the Sahara clearly love and depend on their camels to thrive. And we can see that over and over again just with that dependence and how the camel provides the only means by which human beings can constructively utilize the desert. So we're able to make those inferences. Okay, so that wraps up our first passage. We're going to take a look at another passage because that other one was kind of short. So let's take a look at passage 3. Society in every state is a blessing, but government in its best state is but a necessary evil. We already have our topic, and our topic is government. We can see here that they're talking about society and government in this first sentence. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil, and its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. Already, we kind of note a negative attitude toward government. And I think that's important to capture in our notes because as we can kind of see how this is worded and the syntax that is being used, it's pretty complex. So the more that we can break down to understand, the better. And we see this negative attitude with the idea that government in its best state is a necessary evil, in a worse, it is intolerable. So this language like evil, intolerable, this idea that we suffer when we're exposed to the same miseries by a government within those without a government. All of these words kind of indicate that negative attitude. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built upon the ruins of the bowers of paradise. For where the impulses of conscience clear, uniform and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. But that not being the case, he finds it necessary to surrender up a part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence which in every other case advises him out of two evils to choose the least. So here, I'm going to go ahead and annotate just for some main idea here. So going back to our module in module 2, where we see where the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. So we wouldn't need laws if we had this paradise. But, and here we have the but that's not the case. And man finds it necessary to surrender up part of his property to furnish means for the protection of the rest. So man leans on government as a means of protection, and we can see that here. So no, it's not a perfect system, and they've acknowledged that, and yet we turn to it because we need that protection. And this he is induced to do by the same prudence which in every other case advises him, out of two evils, to choose the least. Wherefore, security being the true design and end of government, it is unanswerably follows that whatever form thereof appears most likely to ensure it to us, with the least expense and greatest benefit, is preferable to all others. And so here, if we can make an inference here, and that is that people, people require government even though it is inherently evil institution. And we can see that this author still finds that government to be an evil institution because out of two evils, man is choosing the least of the two evils, and that being government for the protection of the rest. So even if it's not a perfect system, it is still like the lesser of the two evils. So people require government even though it is inherently evil institution. Let's capture some of those explicit details from the passage, and then we'll make some inferences as well. Okay. So I have typed up a couple of those explicit details, and we're now going to kind of take a look through the passage to see where these explicit details are backed up using evidence. So the first one, when the government causes people suffering, it is further distressing because the people provide support of the government. We can see that here in this first sentence. So when it says, society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. In its worst state, an intolerable one. For when we suffer or are exposed to the same miseries by a government, which we might expect in a country without government, our calamity is heightened by reflecting that we furnish the means by which we suffer. So we see that our calamity, being like our distress, is heightened when we provide support of that government. Number two, laws would be unnecessary if people's conscience were clear and always obeyed, but since that is not so, people must give up something to ensure protection. And we can see that here where it says, for were the impulses of conscience clear, uniform, and irresistibly obeyed, man would need no other lawgiver. But that not being the case, he find it necessary to surrender up part of his property to furnish means of protection of the rest. This is what we annotated earlier, where if we did have clear conscience and were able to, not need another lawgiver, then maybe this wouldn't be the case, but that's not actually true, and man finds it necessary to surrender to government so it can ensure protection for all others. Three, the real purpose of government is security. So people seek to find the form that is the least expensive and has the greatest benefit. And we see that in that last sentence here. The implied ideas here is that government varies in its tolerability, but it's never a positive force. And we see the author reiterating this throughout the whole passage, especially through his word choice. And last one, people's vices create the government. And just a quick note, we need to notice that the inferences require you to draw conclusions not specifically stated in the passage. However, inferences must be able to be supported by evidence from the passage. So it's always important that as we're making inferences that we have evidence to back that inference up with. Otherwise, we are doing what's called assuming, and the SAT likes to use multiple choice question answers that are assumptive as opposed to inference based. So just be careful with that. You're always ruling out answers that cannot be supported with evidence.